Greetings, friends. When we think of ancient Britain, images of Roman legions marching along straight roads, ruins of ancient cities, and majestic structures often come to mind. But what if I told you that long before the first Roman legionnaire landed on these shores, long before their grand villas and baths were built here, Britain was already home to a vibrant, complex, and mysterious world? The Romans, who came here as conquerors, often portrayed the inhabitants of these lands as wild, untamed barbarians. But was this the truth? Or was it perhaps a convenient narrative of the victor, justifying their own dominion? Forget for a moment the stereotypes of painted savages. In this video, we will lift the curtain on pre-Roman Britain to uncover the secrets of the Celts, a people who left behind a vast legacy, yet whose history is often lost in the long shadow of the Roman conquest. Intrigued? Ready to explore Celtic Britain before Rome? Well then, let's begin. The very word Celt is a historical enigma. I will say right away that the Celts did not call themselves that. Around 540 BC, the ancient Greeks first used the word Keltoi to describe the barbarian peoples they encountered north of their colonies in present-day France. Later, the Romans used the term Galli for similar groups, often imbuing the word with the same derogatory meaning, barbarian. What is extremely important is that there is no evidence that the many tribes scattered across Iron Age Europe considered themselves a single Celtic people. Thus, the Celts, as we often imagine them, are largely a later construct, a convenient label used first by outsiders and later by scholars to unite peoples who shared certain traits in culture, language, art, and beliefs. Understanding this is crucial. If a single self-aware Celtic nation likely never existed in antiquity, then the search for a single geographical point of their origin becomes deceptive. Instead, we need to look at how the cultures and languages we now designate as Celtic spread across Europe. It is not a matter of where a single people came from, but how certain cultural traits, art, language, social structures spread. This could have happened through trade networks, elite interaction, and small migrations, rather than necessarily through the mass resettlement of a single people. Therefore, modern science offers several competing ideas regarding the spread of these Celtic elements. The traditional Central European hypothesis links the emergence of Celtic cultures with the archaeological cultures of Hallstatt and La Tène in Central Europe, and their subsequent spread to the West. The Atlantic Bronze Age theory suggests that Celtic languages may have originated much earlier along the Atlantic coast of Europe, Iberia, Western France, Britain, Ireland. Supporters of this idea include Barry Cunliffe and John Coke. The Gaulish core hypothesis considers Gaul, modern-day France, as the main center for the formation and spread of Celtic languages in the first millennium BC. This theory is advocated by Patrick Sims Williams, and although each theory has its strengths and weaknesses, the debates continue to this day. But for our journey, the key is precisely the awareness of the complexity and uncertainty surrounding the origin of the Celts. Because regardless of where exactly on the continent the threads of Celtic culture first appeared, I am still interested in how they were woven into the fabric of ancient Britain. The appearance of the Celts in Britain was not a momentary event, like a landing from a conquering fleet one day. It was a long, drawn-out process that likely began between 1000 and 700 BC and lasted for centuries. Imagine it not as a sudden conquest, but rather as a series of migrations, cultural, and trade exchanges. The first Celts might have come from the lower reaches of the Rhine and Gaul. Later, groups from the Rhone basin might have joined them. Older models sometimes speak of separate waves of settlers. Perhaps early Goidels, later pushed to Ireland and Scotland, then the Britons, who gave the island its name, and finally the Belgi from Gaul, who settled in the southeast. But now, historians consider this idea of waves a significant oversimplification of very complex interactions. The key question is whether the newcomers conquered and destroyed the indigenous population of Britain, who had lived here since the Neolithic and Bronze Ages, or if it was rather a process where relatively small, perhaps elite groups, integrated into the already existing society, gradually spreading their language and culture. Most modern evidence leans toward the second scenario, cultural diffusion, possibly led by an influential elite. Incoming groups carrying Celtic traits could have constituted a dominant minority, perhaps a military aristocracy, which was able to impose its language and cultural practices on a much larger autochthonous population. Genetic studies, particularly those conducted by Brian Sykes and his colleagues, reveal significant genetic continuity between the modern population of the British Isles and the pre-Celtic population of Western Europe. There's a strong link with the ancient Iberians, who migrated from the Iberian Peninsula as far back as the Neolithic. In contrast, the genetic link with the population of Central European regions, considered the ancestral home of continental Celts, the area of Hallstatt and La Tène cultures, turned out to be much weaker. This convincingly suggests that the migrants who brought the Celtic language and culture were relatively few and effectively dissolved among the much larger local population. They passed on their culture and language, but did not carry out a large-scale replacement of the gene pool. Thus, the people we call British Celts were largely the descendants of the older inhabitants of these islands, who adopted new cultural trends. Archaeology also supports this version. We see the gradual appearance of elements of Celtic material culture, alongside the preservation of many local Bronze Age traditions. There is a lack of clear archaeological evidence of mass destruction or conflict specifically during the period of Celtization that would indicate a total conquest and extermination of the previous population. Although intertribal conflicts were common later, there is no evidence of genocide of the indigenous population by the newcomers. This complex process of cultural mixing led to the formation of a diverse landscape of peoples across the island. Before the arrival of the Romans, Britain was not a single kingdom. It was a mosaic of numerous tribes, the largest group of which were the Britons, who inhabited the main part of the island. The territories of modern England and Wales. The name of the island comes from them. They spoke the common Brittonic language, which belongs to the Brittonic branch of Celtic languages, and is the ancestor of Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. Among the Britons, the most powerful tribes were the Catuvalauni, with their capital at Verlamion, modern St. Albans, the Atrebates in Hampshire, the Trinovantes in Essex, and of course the Iceni in East Anglia, whose Queen Boudica would later cause the Romans much trouble. In the north, in the territory of modern Scotland, lived tribes whom the Romans collectively called Caledonians. From the 3rd century AD, the term Picts, meaning painted, began to be used for them. Perhaps because of the custom of these tribes to tattoo or paint their own bodies. Their exact origin and linguistic affiliation are still matters of debate. The third group is the Goidels, who were primarily associated with Ireland. They spoke Goidelic languages, which form a separate branch of Celtic languages, distinct from Brittonic, from which Irish, Scottish Gaelic, and Manx developed. There's a hypothesis that the Goidels might have been the first wave of Celtic settlers in Britain, whom the Britons later pushed west and north to Ireland and Scotland. In the post-Roman period, Goidels from Ireland, whom the Romans called Scoti, actively moved to western Scotland, eventually founding the kingdom of Dalriada and gradually assimilating the Picts. This picture of diversity, Britons, Caledonians, Goidels, and within them dozens more individual tribes with their own chiefs and interests, highlights the key feature of pre-Roman Britain, the lack of political unity. This deeply rooted tribal fragmentation was not just a detail, but a defining characteristic that largely explains why it was so difficult to organize a unified resistance against Rome later. Their primary identity was tribal, not pan-Brittonic. But despite these tribal divisions, certain cultural threads still connected many peoples of Britain. In the largest part of Britain, the main language was Common Brittonic, belonging to the Brittonic branch of Celtic languages. Imagine it as the mother tongue of modern Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. It differed from Goidelic, which was common in Ireland and possibly northern Scotland. For daily life, the transmission of literature or history, the Celts of Britain relied heavily on an oral tradition passed down from generation to generation, especially through the Druids. They did not have their own developed writing system for such purposes. Although later, in the 1st century BC, Ogham script appeared, used by Celts and Picts. Its origin and exact purpose, which may have been a secret code, remain debatable. However, they were not entirely without writing. Letters of the Greek and later Latin alphabets were used for certain purposes, particularly on coins of the late Iron Age. The art of the Celts belongs to the vibrant La Tène culture, which developed in Europe on the basis of the previous, more geometric Hallstatt style. La Tène is famous for its swirling, curvilinear abstract patterns, often with hidden or stylized images of animals. Celtic craftsmen masterfully transform plant and animal forms into complex flowing ornaments, avoiding direct copying of nature. Characteristic are spirals, curls, S-shaped curves, and motifs of palmettes and lotuses. One often needs to look closely to notice hidden faces of animals or birds woven into the patterns, hinting at complex symbolism, perhaps understood only by the initiated. They reached incredible heights in the processing of bronze, gold, and iron. Artisans created exquisite jewelry, decorated weapons, and household items, often adorned with intricate engraving, relief patterns, and inlays of colored glass, enamel, and semi-precious stones. Importantly, Celtic art in Britain developed its own distinct insular style. Although the first examples were brought from the continent around the 4th century BC, local workshops soon emerged. They did not simply copy, but creatively reinterpreted and improved continental designs, achieving extraordinary technical excellence and originality. This insular style perhaps reached its peak just as continental La Tène began to decline, and continued to develop until the Roman conquest, and in some regions even later. This proves that Britain was not just a passive recipient of culture, but an active center of innovation. Among the most famous examples of British Celtic art are the Battersea Shield, a bronze ceremonial shield found in the Thames, which shines with symmetrical swirls and red enamel. Its flawless condition suggests it was likely never used in battle, but served as a symbol of status or a ritual object. The Great Torque from Snettisham, a massive golden neck ring weighing over 1 kilogram, made of 64 interwoven wires, a testament to the incredible skill of the jewelers. Engraved mirrors, bronze mirrors with richly decorated engraving, a characteristic feature specifically of British Celtic art. These artifacts are not just beautiful things. They reveal a sophisticated aesthetic, deep symbolism, and a unique artistic identity that flourished in Britain long before Rome. Art shows us that Britain was part of a wider Celtic world, but at the same time followed its own special path. This vibrant artistic expression was born in a society with its own unique way of life and self-organization. And speaking of society, it must be said that Celtic society in Britain was hierarchical, although the exact structure could vary. At the top stood chiefs or kings, who led individual tribes or their unions. Their power likely rested on military strength, wealth, and lineage. An important role was played by the military aristocracy, the nobility, and professional warriors. In a world where military conflicts and raids were part of life, the status of a warrior was quite high. They possessed the best weapons, participated in banquets, and likely controlled significant land holdings. A separate and extremely influential class was formed by the Druids, whom we will talk about in detail in the next video. But it can already be said here that they were more than just priests. They performed the functions of judges, teachers, advisors, and keepers of traditions. The bulk of the population consisted of common people, primarily farmers who tilled the land, grew crops, and raised livestock. Land may have initially been held primarily in communal ownership, but it must be noted that private ownership by the nobility gradually began to emerge. There were also artisans who made tools, weapons, dishes, and fabrics. Although Caesar described common Gauls as being in an almost slave-like condition, common people in Celtic Britain were likely personally free, though dependent on chiefs and nobility. This tripartite structure, priests, warriors, producers, has parallels in other Indo-European societies. The iconic dwelling was the roundhouse. Usually its walls were built of interwoven wattle daubed with clay and additives, although wood or stone was also used. The roof was conical and covered with straw. A hearth was located in the center. Sizes varied from small ones for a single family to large communal structures. This tradition of roundhouses prevailed in Britain for millennia, from the Bronze Age to the Roman period, which distinguished the British Isles from continental Europe, where rectangular structures predominated. Perhaps the most interesting monuments of the Celtic era are the hillforts, fortified settlements, usually located on hills, surrounded by massive earth ramparts and ditches. In Britain, there are more than 3,000 of them. Their construction required enormous collective effort, which testifies to a high level of social organization and the ability to mobilize a labor force. Their exact purpose is a matter of debate. The defensive function in an era of frequent wars seems obvious. Complex entrance systems and finds of weapons, such as a large number of slingstones near the gates of Maiden Castle, confirm this. But they likely performed other roles as well. Permanent settlements densely built with roundhouses and farm buildings, seasonal assembly centers for rituals, festivals, or trade, symbols of status and power for local chiefs, secure enclosures for livestock. Interestingly, many hill forts were abandoned even before the arrival of the Romans, hinting at changes in the social and political structure of the late Iron Age even before external intervention. In the late Iron Age, especially in southeastern Britain, under the influence of contacts with the continent, larger city-like settlements began to appear, which are sometimes called oppida. These were important political, economic, and craft centers such as Camulodunum, Verlamion, and Caleva. These communities, whether scattered farms or formidable hill forts, were supported by a strong economy based on the land, skilled crafts, and surprisingly, far-reaching trade. Regarding trade, it existed both within the island itself and with continental Europe, especially with Gaul. Britain exported valuable resources, metals such as tin from Cornwall and Devon, iron, possibly lead and silver, grain, livestock, hides, hunting dogs, and likely slaves. These resources, especially tin, put Britain on the map of the developed civilizations of the Mediterranean long before the formal arrival of the Romans, creating paths and connections that cultural and political influences later followed. In exchange, goods from the continent and the Mediterranean arrived in Britain: wine, olive oil, high-quality ceramics, glass, and other luxury items. The growth in trade volume, especially in the late Iron Age, contributed to the emergence of a monetary system. The first coins appeared in Britain around 125 BC. These were imported gold staters from Gaul. Around 100 BC, the first native British coins began to be produced in Kent, cast bronze potens that copied the coins of the Greek city of Massalia. Subsequently, various tribes of southern and eastern Britain began to mint their own gold, silver, and bronze coins. Early coins were often unmarked and had abstract, stylized images that developed from Greek prototypes. Later, especially after Caesar's campaigns, inscriptions in Latin and names of rulers began to appear on coins, for example, Cunobelinus, Verica, and Tatiovanus. The economy of the late Iron Age, especially in southern Britain, demonstrates significant dynamism. It was no longer an isolated society. It actively interacted with the continent, adopted new technologies and social practices such as the use of money. This growing complexity and connections with Rome, especially economic ones, created new dependencies and interests. Elites who benefited from trade could become more favorable towards Rome. At the same time, this made the region strategically important and ultimately more vulnerable to external intervention. Economic integration was quietly preparing the ground for political absorption. Friends, thank you for watching this video until the end. Next week, we will talk about the religion of the Celts, the Druids, their sometimes very cruel and harsh rituals. Thank you for subscribing, commenting, and liking.